Hello, everyone. This is Philosophy of the People coming to you at a different time with a different set of people. It's Stefan Bertram and Jason Myles today, and we're going to be talking about selling out. Special new essay on Ben's Substack. Jason, one of I think like the 3 guest writers now on there. Have you done 2 now? Or is this your first one?
I think it's my first one.
Yeah, I think your first one because I think the other ones you've done have been like for Sublation or whatever.
Sublation, and then I did a guest thing for Anna Kasparian recently.
Okay, well, I'm still winning on guest essays then because I've got 2.
Yeah, I thought you wrote a lot more.
I mean, maybe it's 3, but no, I don't do it often.
Well, you're a busy young man, so busy young person.
Yeah, I was busy doing Dungeons and Dragons today. But no, it was it was an interesting essay, and I'm looking forward to talking about it. What would you say is like your central thesis, Jason?
I've been struggling with the idea around selling out probably since I was 13 or 14, because that's really for me when that terminology became very prevalent in the way that I went about life. And it had a lot to do with the music scenes that I was adjacent to, and the music that I listened to. And the more I got to meet people within the industry, the longer I did music myself, I started to realize that the concept around selling out doesn't really make a lot of sense because for the most part, everybody wants the same things. I didn't really see, especially after I met people and got to know them, I realized that I was projecting an ideology on the people that didn't necessarily have that. And in my mind, I probably made them more, ideologically strong and leftist than they probably were. And this concept around selling out,
the actual clique of people that were like resisting selling out. You just found people who, like the people who weren't sold out, just they were selling something no one wanted to buy.
That's what happens, right? Like I played this music for a long time that certain people dug, certain people didn't dig, but it didn't necessarily have a mass appeal, and I was okay with that. And I never really tried. Even this show, you are a part of a show where I don't try to have a mass appeal. I just try to do things that I think are interesting. I think there's certain conversations that people should be having. I think there's an uncomfortableness of getting in the nuance of uncomfortable conversations like the one we were mildly having about where I'm staying right now, deep in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And when you do those things, you're going to alienate certain people. And when you're trying to have any sort of real success, you can't really alienate people unless alienating people becomes part of your marketing strategy.
Right.
And people that do that. And a perfect example would be kind of the annoyance YouTubers. Those people that go around and try to annoy the shit out of people. Like that seems like the worst thing you could possibly do, but it is financially advantageous for people that are able to do it.
Or like stuff like horrorcore or whatever, which appeals to some people because it doesn't appeal to other people. And it deliberately tries to be like abrasive to these other people, so it appeals to these other people who want something which is kind of offensive to others.
Horror movies is another good example of that, like the really gory, bloody stuff that you're making it for a niche audience. And I think that gets ramped up in the internet era. It starts to get ramped up in the era of consolidation, in my opinion, as these kind of cottage markets are formed on accident for these outsiders that can't get into mainstream radio. But that's kind of where the idea of it started for me, was selling out, because ultimately I don't know if anybody really sells out because everybody kind of wants the same things. And if you really start talking to anyone that you think is this, sorry, can you hear the sirens? I'm so sorry.
Yes. It's very authentic.
Like you have no idea how many. Yeah, there you go. I'm not selling out because I am.
If Jason was sold out, you'd be in a different hotel.
I wish you guys could so see where I am right now. So I mean, meeting people, like one of the things I remember I was hanging out with, and these aren't really indictments on people's character either. That's another thing I think. I don't think people are bad people because they want mass appeal. But I remember hanging out with my good friend Ted Falcone that plays guitar in a band called Flipper, one of the original hardcore punk bands from the West Coast. And we're sitting watching actually old videos of him from like the early 80s. If you go on YouTube, it's called Target Videos. This guy had a little studio set up in San Francisco, and he would shoot certain bands. I think Black Flag has a Target Video series, and Dead Kennedys have one. They're really cool if you like that kind of music. And me and another guy that sadly is no longer with us, we're just watching these videos, and then Ted walked in. This is when I lived in the warehouse. And we were chilling, watching these videos, and Ted starts telling us, "Oh, we did this," and telling us all these fun road stories and stuff like that. And then something happened, and then Rick Rubin was on the screen, and Ted goes, "Oh yeah, I worked with that guy." I'm like, "You worked with Rick Rubin?" He goes, Yeah. When Chris Novoselic joined the band, we got to deal with Def Jam and and you kind of go, "You got to deal with Def Jam, work with Rick Rubin?" Like that's because in your punk rock kid mind, that's the antithesis of what this guy's supposed to do. But in your, I'm a musician and I want to make the best music possible. If the guy from Nirvana goes, "Hey, we're going to work with Rick Rubin and make this record that's going to sell a gajillion copies," you're going to go, "I'd like to pay my rent."
Yeah, I mean, obviously, artistry and music is the only kind of field where you'd be like, "Oh, I'd like to earn more money," and someone else would be like, "What the fuck, man?" Like, if an accountant's like, "Oh, I'm going to move to like a bigger firm," and like, a better firm, a more high quality firm, and like, it goes along with, an increase in doing the work you want to do and whatever. No one's going to be like, "You want to earn more money accounting? What are you doing?" It's only in this kind of music and stuff where people might object, and they see some kind of virtue in the fact that kind of you're unsuccessful.
That's the part that's frustrating. Is I don't want to say the virtue signaling of the unsuccessful, but I mean, we could write another essay that a lot of people would get mad at called "The Virtue Signaling of the Unsuccessful." And I would find myself doing that because sometimes I felt that my friends in the business that I felt didn't work as hard or didn't do the same types of tours. Like I got in a van, Stefan, and played places in the UK that people in the UK don't know exist. You know what I mean? Like I played a lot of little places, and my friends didn't have to do that. They would meet a cool band, and then that band would take them out on the road. And that only happened to me a couple times. But I was like, that's not fair. They're not doing the work. They're not, living in squalor.
They're not sleeping in the van, which they're taking to comfort the
right? They don't do this stupid stuff. And someone had to take me aside and kind of, show me how much of a weenus I was being. And it really got me thinking. And I've kind of been on that pathway ever since. That was maybe 10, 15 years ago. And it's really had me on this path to being a little more calm and sober in my analysis of this idea of what is a sellout. Because I think we're so comfortable with selling out too, that we don't even realize a sellout. And that's why in the piece I wanted to have examples and almost timelines of, I started with Nirvana, right? Because I think for a lot of people, Nirvana is the epitome of keeping it real. And if you think about it, this is a band where I can go to Walmart right now and buy a Nirvana t-shirt. I don't know if Kurt Cobain would be cool with that, but then I don't know where he would be, some 30 years later. Maybe he'd be like, "Dude, I'm so glad my shirt's at Walmart, and I love getting that quarterly check for $400,000 each quarter."
I can just be sad in my house.
That selling of alienation kind of made people think that this is really the real thing. Kind of like the idea of Black people behaving badly is authenticity, and that's what you get with The Chronic. For me, that's, and I didn't write too much about it. I mentioned Thriller and some other stuff. I didn't want to get too deep in the rap weeds. I didn't want to piss everybody off. But if you think about an album like The Chronic, that's really a lifestyle record. This is the hood lifestyle, and this is what it is. And that's kind of what a lot of Black music becomes after that point, right? There's a lot of different there's even I think there's a class stratification actually in Black music for a while, especially with like house music and the early R&B, where these are like working class anthems. Once The Chronic hits and hip hop becomes the dominant form, then Black music is like, well, everything that you do has to be derived from hip hop after this. Even your R&B will be very hip hop centric, because this is the authentic take on your life and it's your culture. So that all this stuff to me kind of wanted me to write this thing and, be even super arty about it and quote Bauhaus in the intro and the ending.
I like that. It's better than Ben, who just quotes like really long segments of academic articles. Like, these shows are quick to get through,
Well, I think that song is really pretty, for a band that's so dark, that's kind of known for creating, if you will, this genre that we'll call goth music. Another thing, I got to meet some of the early pioneers of that genre as well too. And meeting the people that were there at the beginning, they didn't know what to call it. And a lot of these ways that we look at music, it's after the fact, and it's writers and it's record labels that tell us what we're going to like. These cats were just making stuff that they thought was dope. And they were like, well, when we started, they called us punks. Then one day someone called us post-punk. And then one day someone called us goth. I don't know what we do. This is the shit we make. But that song in particular to me is kind of the epitome of doing what you want to do, because you have this band that makes really eerie, kind of cool stuff in the punkish realm. And then there's this acoustic ballad that it sounds like they're talking about selling out. They've never even really said what the song is about. But when I heard it, when I was writing, actually I was playing a playlist and it came on and I was like, there it is. Right. All we ever wanted was everything.
First 10 words, let's go.
Yeah, I was like, this is the epitome of what I'm trying to say here. Trying to kill this
interesting. I was thinking about, there's also because there's two things with selling out. Right? There's selling out in terms of how do you go about producing your music and how do you go about selling it? As in, are you in relationship with a major label, or these days with YouTube and Spotify and blah 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 blah. But there's also the kind of side of selling out of a lifestyle, because I think when I was younger, when I was in my early 20s, my late teens, I wanted to listen to musicians who were authentic in hip hop, in terms of either really being gangbangers or really being actually into drugs and depression and all this kind of stuff. I listened to those guys, and then before I was 25, all those guys died. And that's the real downside to being authentic or not selling out in the lifestyle way, is you don't really last very long. I used to listen to Lil Peep, XXXTentacion, and Pop Smoke, as well as some other guys. And 2017, 2018, funnily enough, Lil Peep died when I was in Raqqa in Syria.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to Lil Peep for the first time while I was in Syria. And when he died, and I was fine, I was like, this is not how I expected things to go, really. But yeah,
it's funny you mentioned those. Go ahead.
Go on.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying all these guys ended up dead. And it's a real cost to being an authentic musician, that these things which people think are cool and, like to imitate or whatever, actually doing them is incredibly dangerous, and becoming very rich and famous doesn't make you immune to these effects.
No, and that's what's so interesting about Keith Richards, right? That guy lived forever, and he is just drugs personified. You look at him and you're like, that's what drugs looks like. Lemmy from Motorhead is another guy.
Effect, right? Because obviously there's some guys we know now, you were doing drugs for 34 years and you're fine. but it's like a survivor effect, right? Because the guys that didn't died, all the guys that couldn't handle it stopped.
Can you hear me?
You're coming in quite badly.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me though?
I can hear you. You just there's problems with your video, but your audio is almost fine.
Oh God. Okay, because it looks like the reception is bad. Let me try.
Yeah, the only problem is I can't tell when you're speaking, so I don't know when to stop talking.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me right now? Because for some reason the internet's all trippy here. I don't know why.
Yeah, your sound is fine. Again, it's just the video.
Okay. What's interesting about the little rappers to me that you're talking about, it's the first time in hip hop where drugs use from the artist becomes the focal point. And it really starts to me with Eminem, because Eminem is talking about drugs beyond marijuana. He's talking about kind of even beyond psychedelics. And that opened the door for a whole genre of what people are later going to call SoundCloud rappers, who are kind of the littles. And that was a weird turn in the music, in my opinion, because for years, rappers were either telling stories of drug dealers or bragging about being drug dealers themselves. And that even about being drug dealers themselves comes like later in the 90s to the early 2000s.
Right, you're never going to rap about you being the junkie yourself, right?
No. And when you get the junkie rappers, for a lot of older people, that was like, this isn't for us anymore. Did I break up?
A little bit.
Still, okay, sorry. So the junkie rappers were interesting to me because that's when I saw a changing of the guard in the genre of music, where all the authentic guys, even the gangsters, were no longer relevant. And for a hot minute, it was really about these junkies rapping. And we can argue, is it authentic or not? But then that's back to, do you have to have a hard scrabble street life for people to listen to what you're saying? And these guys necessarily didn't have that life. And what's so funny is the hard scrabble street life of a rapper is such a short time in that genre, because early in the first wave of it, these guys are really old because they had been doing it and not being able to have record labels put out music. They could afford to press records. So rap is being, you recorded a live show. And these dudes, again, they were a lot older. Then you get the second wave where you actually get youth in the second wave of hip hop. And then by that time, it's kind of mixing around that golden era where, again, there's a youth movement in it. And when that tails off is really when the lifestyle stuff gets in, gangster stuff gets in. And after that is when you kind of come to this weird, rap goes to the club and it never leaves. And then part of the club is just the kids who drugs at home, I guess. We can't get in the club yet, so we can do all the drugs that you would do at the club. We can do them at home. So I'm gonna fix this Wi-Fi so you can say something profound.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to try and switch to mobile, and I'll just lecture for a bit on something. Yeah, what I was going to say was, I think there's also, what I wanted to kind of propose to Jason now is that these days in contemporary music, like Jason in the article talks about, like people like Nirvana, like kind of had a choice. There was some choice there. There wasn't a choice. There was no way they could become super popular without selling out to a major label. But there was an option for them to just not do that, to in the end not sell that many copies, to just do small shows forever and like maybe slowly become like at least a relatively well-known force. Not nearly as famous as they actually became, but relatively well-known without selling out. But what I wanted to ask Jason about was how that's different to contemporary music, where with contemporary music, there's basically no option apart from to go through these incredibly popular, these massive corporate websites. So, for instance, I listened to a rapper called Cemetery in his group called The Haunted Mound. They make horrorcore. He used to make blackened trap. earlier on in his music career, as in rapping over black metal beats. His album Rainbow Bridge 3 is possibly kind of the most sonically strange and out there album that I've heard. Jason looks okay now on the little thumbnail, but I'm sure that he can add himself back. Yeah, so the Haunted Mountain album, Rainbow Bridge 3, is like kind of the most sonically insane and sonically abrasive thing I've heard in a while. But despite all that, from the very beginning, Haunted Mound and Cemetery have been completely dependent on Twitter, SoundCloud, YouTube, and Spotify for them to get anywhere. So they're never signed to a record label. I don't think they ever will, because there's not that much point these days. All the distribution's online, and they do like a US and European tour at like at venues of like a few thousand. But while before in history, this might have been by word of mouth by a local scene, they're not in a local scene at all. It's all through the internet. And because of how the internet works, especially these days, that's all filtered to these very large corporate websites.
That's another thing that you have brought up in our group chat about the corporate websites. And it... Uh-oh. Did you remove me?
No. I just
put okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, my thing was over the thing. What's interesting about the corporate website thing is that was a huge help. Like for people that complain about things like Spotify and all social media, if you made anything that fell outside of the purview of a major record label, because at a certain point in the mid 90s, if you weren't on a major record label, there was no way in the world you were going to get radio airplay. There was a hot minute where a local station would play local artists. And once that was over, you were maybe part of a local scene, and maybe you could sign a smaller label or a subsidiary of a larger label that had a fake smaller label, and then maybe you get on MTV 120 Minutes or something. But you had to have some sort of avenue into radio airplay for people to continuously listen to your music or discover it to want to buy it. And the thing that people like Conan and I talk about all the time with Spotify is we may not like the payouts, but we are not blind to the fact that we would never have a way for people to listen to us without these avenues. Maybe you can have a website, but again, that boils down to I probably had to come to your town and say, hey, I have a website. And then you have
HTTP www.
You got to care enough about it to find it. So to be like, I'm on Spotify, I'm on Apple Music, I'm on wherever you get music, I'm there. I do get a nice little $20 check each quarter from people that discover this show, and they find out that all the music on this show is from me. Even that intro to this show is a song I made that is not available to purchase.
I always forget the name of it, but that one song you did where you go 150 military bases across the world.
Liberate. Yeah.
Liberate. That has like 600, or I don't know, 800 YouTube views, and like 200 of them are mine. I always forget about the thing, but when I watch it again, I watch it like 30 times. I love that song.
That's how we came out to shows, and we would play these places where people would look at us all crazy because we do look like four very different individuals.
Right.
There's another black guy in the group, and if you saw me and him together, you would not think we were friends. Like we just like none of us look like we're friends, and people would just stare, and then we would be super quiet, and there'd just be feedback, and then we'd go into that song. Like the way it sounds is how we perform it live, like hella feedback, and then we just go into it, and then people would just be like, "What the fuck is this?" And we hella love doing like, "What the fuck is this?" But back to the whole idea of selling out, you're not gonna have a certain mass appeal when you want to make music that make people say, "What the fuck is this?" all the time. But are you having fun? That's kind of what matters to me. I'm still shocked that people watch this show considering the intro to the main show, right? The intro to the main show is pretty heavy. And when we decided to do that song for the intro to the show,
we actually played it once to the people on Give Them an Argument. It was like that. What the hell?
They were like, no.
I think everyone decided it was cool, but like I think they were in for a surprise, you know.
Where's the jazz? Where's the smooth Kenny G like jazz? But when you dig doing stuff like that, you can act like you're better than people. Like I'm better than you. It's like, nah, I'm not better than anybody. This is what I personally dig, and I wanted to make it the theme song to the show as a joke. Because if people really complain that much, I probably would take it down. But now I don't give a damn at this point. But the back to the corporate, having to use these corporate avenues, that's interesting to me because part of me is still thinking about that. Like, am I an old man yelling at clouds by saying you really have to get out there with people? Because the thing, and I'll use what we do as a perfect example. There's a younger generation, your age, that is very attuned to search engine optimization, to videos that look aesthetically pleasing, to having the right thumbnail that's going to attract a certain amount of attention, to literally having their own Discord pages to ask the people that view them, does this look better? Should I have this title for my first book? And to me, that goes against every fiber of my being in doing something creative. I don't ask you what you think I should do. I do it. Because that's what creative people do.
Because otherwise, what's the point? Like, if I'm not doing it myself, then...
Yeah, that's AI, right? But these cats, to a certain degree, are in our world. They do, I guess, what they want to do, I guess, and they've just found a different way to do it. But there's just something that kind of, I don't have the right word for it. I was talking about this with Mike Watson for actually quite some time. We were going on and on about this like two old dudes. Like, it just feels a little performative in your leftism, if you will. Choreographed, that's a great word, Dusty. Choreographed, I'm looking at the chat. And these aren't people that, again, I dislike. I like a lot of the stuff that they do. It just kind of weirded me out that that's the avenue that they would go. Because, you see the comments on some of these videos. Someone's like, what you should do? You should have so-and-so on your show. And that's the easiest way to make me go, I'm not doing that now. No.
But I also, like, a guest can never make a show, right? Because they're on once and then they're gone the next time.
Yeah. I mean, people sometimes suggest people, or they'll even hook me up with people. I've had.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I did
guests,
start as a guest.
You started as a guest, right? So some of the guests become family, if you will. I do look at Stefan as definitely part of the TIR family, which is a very, when you're part of that circle, right? It's a it's a tight circle of offensive language.
I mean, less so when Gene left the group chat. Not because he was having drama with us. He didn't want to post so much.
Now he just sends it to me personally.
Yeah.
No, I just personally get these horrible things. So that to me is what's really interesting about what you said about the corporate website thing, because it's like there's this allure of independence, but are you really independent? Because you know what truly independence looks like? When you don't need these things and you can thrive. Like, I need YouTube, and they're effing with me again. I'll tell you personally, off air. But so I'm kind of in the same boat as those people to a certain degree, because this is the platform that we have to talk to people in 2025. I can't just do this locally on public access television and have the same amount of people watch what I do, have a Patreon that's as large as ours is, and So I don't know. Maybe I'm the sellout.
Do you know what's kind of crazy? That I don't think if you said this like before, it would be unbelievable anytime in the past like 20 years. But it's really hard to listen to the new Kanye West song. It's really hard to find it anywhere because it's deleted
It's
off.
super hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's kind of the model for a lot of these cats because they grew up with a different Kanye, so they can view him as a whole individual, because they can go, like, even you can look at Kanye and go, when I was a little dude, that's the George Bush doesn't like black people Kanye. That's Blood Diamonds Kanye. That's Graduation Day Kanye, right? And this new manifestation of slavery was a choice Kanye, you could even sit back and go, well, what he means is, and I'm with you. I'm actually right there with you going, well, what he means is, but I'm also saying this guy has made $1 billion in an era where content is everything. We are always mining content, and every part of our life is content. When I look at a guy like a couple of people that I peripherally watch that are large streamers, one guy in the heavy music world, and then a guy like Hassan Piker, you watch these guys have these kind of online breakdowns about being burnt out. And even their burnout has to be content.
Yeah.
Like, when everything is content, you're never going to have a life. And we're going to see a lot more of these, guys in their late 20s, early 30s that have very large platforms, a lot of financial success, going, I can't do this anymore, because they have to look in the mirror, and probably just even in the mirror, they see the comments coming down because, you don't own yourself anymore. And how do you even know what is you, when even the private moments of your life have to have a photographer there to share it on Instagram? So you don't even have private moments of your life. And that's where we are now. And that's why I thought this thing about selling out is kind of an interesting conversation, or meditation, as Ben says, about this idea, because you can use your leftism as your authenticity. Well, I'm a leftist. It's like, yeah, but you're fucking, constantly fucking on air. When do you get a chance to do any left shit? When do you read a book? Are you going to show me you reading a book?
Yeah, Hassan puts like a lot of hours into streaming, right? I never watch him, but he's one of those guys that puts like 8 to 12, no?
That's a lot. That's a lot of time on air doing mundane things that maybe you shouldn't show people. Like, I've gotten to the point now, I'm like, I'm only going to do shows in 2 parts of my house, because I want to have some of my house that no one knows what it looks like. You know what I mean?
From now on, Jason's only going to record in shitty hotels in Skid Row, deep Tenderloin.
I was hella close, because I wanted to show you guys. I know this is a little off topic. I wanted to show you guys where I am. So my daughter graduated college on Friday, and so is my 3 older kids and my daughter's boyfriend, and we're just loitering outside after she graduates, hanging out. I'm having a ball with my kids. They're making so much fun of me, Stefan. My kids think I dress like a cornball. They think my life is ridiculous. My older son has my name. He's not a junior. He's a different middle name. But I was like, son, I'm don't add anybody on social media that you don't know. He goes, I think that's happened to me a couple times, Dad. So we're having fun. We go to this area called Nob Hill because there's a donut shop that I love. We all get donuts at like almost midnight. I'm still having this fun hang session with my kids, and I have to, tell them I love them so much. And my son has a BMW, Stefan, that's tinted out.
Right.
And keep in mind, he's half Asian, so he rice rocketed it out. He cut the muffler, right? He lowered the suspension, so the suspension's all effed up on it. So he's got this sick little BMW that's all tinted, and he's got front tint on it. And as we're talking, I'm looking at the car, and this fool has old registration in the back of his car. And I'm like, why are you driving around in this drug dealer mobile? and you have bad registration. He goes, no, I have the good ones in the front. I just didn't want to put them on because I got all the other tags on there and I wanted to get them all off and then put the good one on. And I'm like, look here, little Negroid boy, you don't have a gun or warrants. If you get pulled over, you are definitely going to get the business by the police because you're not a threat. And so my son wants to drop me off at the hotel. He's like, Dad, I'll drop you off. I was like, you know what, kid? Because I love you, I will walk back. I will walk back because I can't have you driving the drug dealer uniform into the hottest dope spot, probably in the San Francisco Bay Area. I just can't.
They'd be knocking your doors down.
Oh, dude, it would have been either that or the cops would have pulled him over and gave everybody anal cavity searches. And I was like, I cannot have that happen on this day of your sister's graduation. So I'm going to walk back. And the kids are all like, okay, well, text us. And then my daughter's boyfriend's like, well, them niggas probably know him anyway. So I'm walking back, and it's so funny, Stefan. Not funny, haha, but you see this transformation of the city go from this vibrant nightclubs and bars and pretty people are everywhere having fun and they're drunk and they're high-fiving their friends and chicks are looking cute, and all of a sudden everybody's hunched over. There's just feces everywhere. And I'm like, I think I have another half mile to walk through. And it was the whole way. And I was like, how did I not know this? Like, I'm
here. You started this walk not realizing how much shit you'd have to walk. I assume you were just being that
I didn't think it was I knew that it was gonna be a little bit, but I didn't know it was this bad. It's bad. It's bad. And then the hotel is like the epicenter. It's literally in the middle of the shit.
Yeah, Jason's like in the hell portal right now.
So,
yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. If we were sellouts, what we would be doing is you would be filming on the street, and I'd be like, "Ha ha, he looks fucked."
And I can't. I kind of just wanted to show you guys where I was. I was like, nah, I think they know where I'm at. You could look up on the news and find out the area I'm in and know that I'm in the fucking hood. What's really the real crime out here is that parking is like $40. It's like, god damn.
Yeah, for $40, you'd expect someone to like guard the car for you.
Man, well, I hope my shit's all right. If you break into my shit, if you passed all them Teslas to get to my Hyundai, you really wanted to get the change of pesos I have in my car. I know there's a broke iPhone charger in here somewhere.
Mexican coins in there, which you can't even exchange.
That's all I have is Mexican coins. Yeah, dude. If you break into my car, you are totally just practicing.
Do you want to actually kind of give your history of selling out? Because we've kind of jumped through to the 2020, but not really talked about the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, that was really what I wanted to do, was paint a picture of the Nirvana thing isn't really new. And so what precedes Nirvana is hair metal. And another reason why this was really on my mind is I just finished writing my piece for the Metal Compendium for Revol Press, which is about 80s hair metal and this idea of capitalist reproduction. And so Nirvana comes at kind of the end of hair metal, and there's this idea that Nirvana killed hair metal because they're just so authentic that they killed it with realism. I'm like, no, that scene had been dead. It was a very short-lived scene, much like grunge. Grunge is like maybe 3 years. And hair metal really is about 3-4 years. And that scene,
wasn't hair metal kind of like almost purpose made or like intentionally made to like be like a corporate sellout thing? Like, I can't remember exactly what the story is, but
it was okay. So where in your hood, 1982 was a very big year for the genre of heavy metal. It gets a real big kick in the arse from this kind of young wave of bands that is kicking up the older guard that it came out in the latter part of the 70s, like Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. So you have bands like Saxon and who else? I can't think off the top of my head right now. You know, Motorhead had been around since the 70s because Lemmy was in Hawkwind, and we've been around since the 60s. But 82 is a big year for hard rock music in general. In the US, in the UK, and even in certain Latin American countries, there's a lot of good hard rock albums where people are trying to go as heavy as possible, even some vocals that are screamy. You know, bands like Scorpions that kind of gave you the blueprint of the blistering guitar solo. And these guys are trying to copy it. And eventually you're going to get the US version of that a year later with Metallica and Slayer. And it's so popular that there's a look attributed to it. And in the United States, we don't really have music festivals historically like your country has music festivals. And there's a few music festivals that happen here that are historic. And there's one that to me doesn't get its due, which is the US Festival. It only happened twice, in 82 and 83. And in 83, they decided to have multiple days. And they had I think they called it a heavy metal day. And on that heavy metal day, the Quiet Riot and Motley Crue played. And that's kind of the day, that's the moment, and it was broadcast on MTV. And that's the moment where that music really blows up, and the labels see that they outsold the other days damn near 2-1. So there's like 300,000 people in, I believe, San Bernardino, California to watch. And it's a stage. We're not talking about ping pong stages and all this other stuff. There's one stage, and you're going to watch, you know, these 6-7 bands. And Motley Crue, if you watch their performance, it's not very good, but they had this look that was, and I'm a fan of the band. If you look at how they came out, like all those bands, they had a real look that was like, this is the metal. And what these guys were trying to do, like Motley Crue and Rat, and I use those two bands because they're kind of the first guys to try to do it. There's other people that were bigger, but they're after the fact. But what they're trying to do is say, we like this metal stuff. We don't really dig the punk stuff, but there's elements of their iconography that we dig. And we really hate the new wave stuff. That's what they would probably say, that's for pussies. But we like this rock stuff. We're gonna take this rock stuff. It's metal, but we don't want to be metal because once you're metal, girls don't show up to shows. So how can we be metal and still get laid? And that's really what hair metal is. Like, we want to make music for mass consumption, and this is what people are consuming in mass, which is metal. So let's dress ourselves up all metally and go full hog. And they do that with their first couple records. They do find massive success with their first major label release, which is called Shout at the Devil. And with that massive success, everyone in LA goes, that's what you have to do to get to the top. You have to wear those clothes and do these songs. What if we made our songs even more accessible? What if we had bigger hooks than Motley Crue? You know, because we actually have musical chops. So that's what you get for a while. And then Motley Crue really changes it up with their third record. It's called Theater of Pain. And they just literally go in the closet of Aerosmith. And what if podcasters had hair metal face? That was called 2020, Kushlik. Bernie Sanders was the podcast hair metal face. And they just glam it up, if you will. And it's just a rehash of the 70s. And they're done with that relatively quickly. Themselves are done with that relatively quickly. But again, that's the blueprint. So bands like Poison, who are younger and don't live in Los Angeles, they see Motley Crue in 85 and 86, and they go, okay, well, this is what we have to do. We have to put on makeup, dye our hair blonde, wear pink and really loud colors. And that's the key to success. And so everyone on the Sunset Strip is trying to do that. But Motley Crue is done. Once they see the copycats, are like, I'm over it. And then a band called Guns N' Roses comes out, and they never really dug the whole glammy part of the look, because they were into another band that didn't really blow up, that is from Finland, called Hanoi Rocks. And Hanoi Rocks is like the Rolling Stones and the New York Dolls all rolled into one. And that's what Guns N' Roses wanted to do, because if you listen to Guns N' Roses music, it just kind of, to me, it's like the Rolling Stones turned to 11. And they didn't really have all the makeup, they didn't have the heavy metal outfits, and they were authentic. But they're also part of a younger generation that just didn't dig all of the hair and the glam and the glitter. Again, they would say this is for pussies. And to me, more so than Nirvana, that kills that scene. Because also, this music isn't really building out a younger fan base that's going to keep it going. There's not 12-year-old kids putting on lipstick going, this is the pathway to success. I want to do this. There's people going, I like Guns N' Roses. It's just, I can do that. And that sounds cool. So that scene is kind of dead by then. And then even within that hair scene, I talk about the bands from the 70s that were huge in the 70s. Like, let's say, I think I use Aerosmith as an example, and your buddies from the UK, Whitesnake. I know you're good friends with David Coverdale, because everybody in the UK knows each other.
When you were talking about, I was wondering what Venom, what their current, like, because Venom are reunited apparently again. What current albums are making? Apparently they do thrash metal now.
Well, they were kind of progenitors of that genre in a way.
I was just wondering. So sorry, I should say they still do thrash metal. I was wondering if they changed something else. But also, I mean, with their black metal album, it's not a black metal album. It's an album called Black Metal. It's kind of the original of all the kind of extreme, like thrash and all this kind of stuff in black metal and so on.
Oh no, Venom kind of lays the groundwork for this idea of what metal's supposed to be. It's evil and dark, and it's Satan, right? They had the pentagram on the cover for 1980. I think that's when black metal comes out. That, or maybe it's even 82. That is very frightening. I was they're embracing it.
And there was a criticism section. I was like, what the fuck could there be criticisms for? And it was like, back in the day, like, it was actually really crazy to put Satan shit.
To embrace it to that level, because bands like Motley Crue were literally doing what Venom is doing. Go watch their first ever video, is Live Wire. The video starts off with this very cheap special effect fake skull with a pentagram on it and a candle, and it comes in the screen like this. And then then the second record, they call it Shout at the Devil. And it's just a pentagram and the name of the band, Shout at the Devil. And I went back and watched old Motley Crue interviews from that record cycle, that promotion cycle. And they were always asked, hey, are you guys satanic? No, why would you say that? Okay. But when you think about bands like Aerosmith and Whitesnake, these are guys that were part of a hard rockin' scene in the 70s, more so Aerosmith, and they had these big records. Their drug addictions, band membership changes, by the time they get to the 80s, they're not really relevant. Before they do Walk This Way with Aerosmith, they had all went to rehab, they cleaned up, did a record together called, I think, Done with Mirrors. Nobody gave a shit about it. It's not a very good record. They do the song with Aerosmith, they get do the song with Run DMC, they get a second life. And they put out Permanent Vacation. But in Permanent Vacation, and even if you think about with Run DMC, they're working with really large producers that are really taking the rough edges off that sound and making it extremely catchy and poppy. They're working with people like Desmond Child, and they're writing big anthems for movies. This isn't the same hard rocking band that does rocks and Draw the Line. This is something very different. This isn't Toys in the Attic. Like, that Aerosmith is gone. But because they've been around for so long and so influential, for some reason we don't call them sellouts. And that's kind of the epitome of what happens to a sellout, right? You've gotten to a point where what you do originally doesn't work anymore, so you tone everything down and you have someone else write songs for you. And hopefully you have big time pop success. Whitesnake is the same exact way. They never really hit in America the way they hit in the UK. They work with a big time. Dropped your microphone. They work with a big time pop producer. They literally redo songs from '84 because there were just Americans that didn't know those songs. And there's a sheen to those songs. They change a couple words in the hook. They have the singer's girlfriend, the late Tawny Katane, doing cartwheels and the splits on Mercedeses. and they go from being a band that's, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from their record label to being in the black and quite successful because of making these videos for MTV. And never did I hear anybody call Whitesnake a sellout. Because they had been around for so long. I think Coverdale sang in Deep Purple or Rainbow at one point in time. So they were able to use their age and their time in the business as authenticity, if you will. But for me, young punk rock, Jason, I look at that as like, well, isn't that just them selling out? Like, why didn't we call them sellouts?
Right.
In 87 and 88. And is it just part of the MTV generation that we just wanted content? Whatever that content may be.
Well, I guess it's like thing of when did selling out even start becoming a concept? Because like no one's going to be accused of being a sellout in the 1950s because music wasn't subcultural, apart from like maybe jazz.
My friend Alexander Herbert has an interesting perspective. He says punk rock was over when the Sex Pistols break up. Mm-hmm. And that always kind of resonated with me as like, oh, that's interesting. Like, why do you say that? He goes, because everything changed after the Sex Pistols break up. Susie Sue doesn't really go a punk route. A lot of the guys that were inspired by the Sex Pistols go a very different route. And that's kind of when we get this idea of this genre of music we're going to call post-punk. Mm. So he looks at that as kind of the end of a moment. I am still wrestling with that concept. I think he made some very interesting points when you think about all the bands that come out of the Sex Pistols Manchester show. None of those bands we would consider punk rock. So we're talking about Joy Division, the Smiths, maybe the Buzzcocks we might consider a punk band, but not in that same way that we saw the Sex Pistols. Because of the way things travel a little slower in the era before the internet and MTV, the United States has their own version of this moment in the early 80s with what we're going to call hardcore. And for me, a year where we stopped talking about selling out is really 94 is where it starts. That's the end of Kurt Cobain dies that year, and Green Day releases Dookie that year. And Green Day is actually facing the sellout charges because they come from a punk scene here in the Bay Area, and people from that scene was like, you're signing to a major, you're a sellout, blah, 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 blah. But they write the music that's going to become this thing that we're going to call pop punk. And it doesn't really start with Green Day. You could say it starts with bands like Bad Religion and the Descendants, that style. But Green Day really gives you the blueprint on how to do it and how to be countercultural in this mall-friendly way. And then a band like Blink-182, much like, so if Motley Crue takes heavy metal and makes it very digestible for the suburbs, Green Day does that for punk rock. And if Poison is the band that takes what Motley Crue, they're like, I'm a derivative of Motley Crue's worst sellout moment, then Blink-182 is that for punk rock.
Yeah.
And I think by the time you get to Blink-182, it's over. We're all sellouts now by the time you get to Blink-182. Because this is just music about, booger flicking and liking a girl and hitting her in the arm. It's there's nothing to it but just suburban hell yeah. I'm gonna pierce my lip, dye my hair green, do some weird drugs, have a horrible meth addiction. But I'm going to be doing it with major chords. So, but also when things become really cliche, and that music became really in the early 2000s, that stuff was just made for, you know, those 2000s movies where everybody's wearing Abercrombie and Fitch. Hot Topic becomes a real place where people get not just their countercultural clothes, but that's also where you go get your countercultural music with those compilation CDs of the Warped Tour.
Right.
So
I go to my
you're
big
never
store
gonna
to get my counterculture.
I'm gonna go to the mall. I'm gonna go to this massive chain. I'm gonna go buy an Anarchy T-shirt next to my Marilyn Manson T-shirt, next to my Korn T-shirt, and I'm gonna get this compilation CD of all the music that I need in my life. And you know what? I could even buy a skateboard there. Tee. So, like by that moment, we're all dialing it in, and I don't know if people want to admit it. But that's how I look at that era. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I mean, it's not really for me to say. I wasn't really around or thinking about it, you know.
Because the term sellout really goes away because we've embraced things like pop punk, and I think once you embrace that as a concept, it's over. You know, and also too by that time. Oh, go ahead.
I think for me, like, I like distinguish these two types of authenticity earlier between like or not selling out or whatever, as in like your relationship with labels and this kind of stuff, and then on the other hand, like a lifestyle thing. And I think by the time I started paying attention to stuff, it had entirely been reduced to the latter thing. It was all about to the degree that someone's authentic or not sold out or whatever. It's the degree to which, you know, they're still on the streets or whatever. But being on the streets was then compatible also because record labels became a lot less reluctant about signing whoever, you know, like they stopped having any concern about like, oh, this guy is literally a gangster or whatever. They're like, it's fine, just give him $3 million. And if he ends up in prison, like no one looks back on us, no one gives a shit. Like, and so I think it entirely became a thing of a lifestyle. And that obviously is this, you know, it is a general social movement where we move away from structuring like our ideas based on actual material reality and like economic material reality in terms of the relationship you have with the label and the relationship you have with these big corporations like YouTube and Spotify to like, oh, how do I feel about it and what do I do in my personal life and so on.
Well, that's when I wanted to draw a bow on everything with Colin Kaepernick. So I go away from the music aspect of the conversation, which I just want to do because I also think that's fun and people are going to get mad and be like, not this band, and talk about a guy like Colin Kaepernick, which for a lot of people, they go, he's this generation's Muhammad Ali. I've heard numerous people say that. And I'm always like, I guess you don't really know Muhammad Ali. Colin Kaepernick is a football player, for those that don't know. If you have been living under a rock, because this was a pretty big story, even if you're not a sports fan, was a football player for the San Francisco 49ers here. And he was not a troublemaker. He actually was a very, very good kid for all intents and purposes. And in about 2016, there were some high profile police killings. And two things happened. I didn't even realize these were a day apart. I forgot about that. Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were two very high profile police killings that happened literally a day apart in like different parts of the country. One happened in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the other happened in St. Paul, Minnesota. And with Philando Castile, he had a permit to carry a weapon. He lived in not a great neighborhood, so sometimes people carry a weapon. He worked in his community as a lunch guy for the local public school, and he was in the car with his girlfriend and her child. He got pulled over at a traffic stop. He told the officer, as he were instructed to do when you have this permit, that you have a gun in the car, and he was getting him the permit, and the officer said, "Don't grab the gun," and he shot him several times into the car, and he killed him. Philando Castile's girlfriend started live streaming it, which is still a relatively new thing on Facebook, because she was kind of in shock. The cop shot into the car. There was a kid in the car.
Yeah.
Didn't hit the girlfriend, luckily. Didn't hit the child, luckily. But the child had to watch this man die in front of her. She had to watch her mom try to stay cool while all this is going on. And then Alton Sterling, we don't see necessarily the video of it, but he's a guy that sold like bootleg DVDs. The cops said that they thought he was going for a gun for some reason, and they shoot and murder him. And these happened a day apart. So this idea that, no matter what happens to you when you're black, you're going to get fucked with by the cops is really resonating with a guy like Colin Kaepernick, who has lived a life where he's going to face some racism because he's a mixed race black guy raised by a white family in the Central Valley of California, which isn't that racially diverse, I guess you could say. And his family was somewhat well-to-do. So he I guess you would call it microaggressions that he faced a lot of. So he's internalizing this stuff, and he's pissed off. So, and he's injured at the time. So he's like, I'm not going to stand for the national anthem. Yeah, national anthem can eat a dick right now. And it was a slow news day, and a reporter goes, "Hey, you didn't stand for the anthem. And I've noticed you haven't been standing for the last few weeks." And I write the quote that he says. He always says like a couple words about, I think maybe 12 total words about why he didn't want to stand. And it had to do with the way he felt the country was treating its people, especially its black people. That's fair, but it wasn't the massive protest like Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali went on every public forum possible and says, I'm not going to Vietnam to shoot a yellow man that never called me the N-word. Doesn't make sense. And he was willing to risk his career over it. We forget that MLK, Muhammad Ali, these guys really lost a lot of their following by saying this war is not what we support, and it's not right. Colin Kaepernick was like, this isn't cool, and I'm just going to sit out. Had that reporter not asked him, I'm like that, but that was enough, because he's from an era, again, we talk about when did this all start? He's from an era where that personalized, I'm not doing anything, is activism. Someone asked him a question, and he did speak up about it. I'm going to continue to sit out. And the news went crazy with him disrespecting the flag. Around that same time, there's an ex-veteran named Nate Boyer that hears of Kaepernick's protest, silent protest, and is furious. This man is a hyper-conservative ex-military and hates Colin Kaepernick. To this day, he hates Colin Kaepernick. And he meets with Colin Kaepernick the guy writes this open letter on why Colin Kaepernick is disrespecting all these servicemen. So Colin Kaepernick is starting to lose endorsements. Everything's kind of falling apart for this guy that didn't really do, again, he just sat out and he said things that no one can argue. But it was never about police violence. It was about disrespecting the country. So he's a younger athlete that is very brand conscious. He comes up in an era where you have to be, attractive and say the right things. Both teams play hard. He's never going to give you a crazy quote. That was so off the cuff for an athlete of that era to say anything they felt. So Kaepernick agrees to meet with this Green Beret, and after their meeting, it's a heated meeting apparently. The Green Beret says, "Well, could you at least kneel for the fallen soldiers?" And Kaepernick agrees to kneel because he's also trying to protect his image.
Yeah.
The kneeling becomes a thing, and the NFL is pissed at him.
Yeah, and it's crazy. Obviously, like that was meant to be more respectful or whatever, but because it was a new thing, basically, it became like a clear signal of taking this position, and then instead, like, the right wing hated that way, way, way more than him saying.
And again, and I say in the piece, if no one asks him a question, Colin Kaepernick continues to sit down. He probably continues to play professional football. The guy's only like 35, 36 years old. Maybe he's 37 now, but he's not that old.
I mean, this was 2016 when he was like, what, 28?
Yeah, that poor guy, look, he lost his career. We don't know if he would have been the greatest quarterback ever or finished in mediocrity. I don't know. But it was messed up that the NFL is so reactionary that a guy that literally knelt in front of a flag after meeting with a former Green Beret is someone that you think is persona non grata.
So did no one ever kneel with him? Was he always a lonely
yes.
kneeler?
No. There was a couple other players that did, and they caught some heat too. I think it was Justin Reed and another guy, and then a few other teams started kneeling as well, because also people forget that
Andy Dalton.
Oh, he's still around. I don't think Andy Dalton kneeled. Andy Dalton is the whitest white man ever. Oh. Donald Trump got mad. He gets into office and he says, these football players kneeling, I'm going to stop it right now. Okay, right? This Donald Trump is all about a culture war. That ended up pissing off the NFL. Even these owners that are huge donors, they were pissed off. And so when Donald Trump says that, all the players, even Tom Brady, their middle finger to Trump was they all knelt. And then you get the NFL, doing the erase racism in the end zone and all that stuff. But the damage had already been done to Colin Kaepernick's career. But Colin Kaepernick is also made a hero for this extremely passive gesture. He was never trying to organize players around some sort of anti-police violence movement. Yeah. It was just his personal thing that he wanted to do to feel good about his disdain for the system.
Have you heard, do you know anything about the history of kneeling at football events in the UK?
No.
Okay, so you might find this absolutely crazy. But Premier League players and England national team players have been kneeling for like years and years and years. And there was some points where it was actually like really politically provocative. Games against a game against Bulgaria had to be called off because of like intense racism from the crowd. Because the UK national team's like half black-ish normally. It's only ever white and black people. There's no one. Asians don't play football. But the crazy thing now
team is going to get real pissed at you.
In 2024, 2025, they're still kneeling years and years after everyone in the United States stops, but now it's fully institutionalized. So I can read this from the Premier League page. Premier League captains have confirmed that players will once again take the knee during specific matches during the 2024-25 season. Players will take the knee at the Premier League opening and final match round of the season, as well as the dedicated No Room for Racism fixtures in October and April.
Interesting. I remember when I went to the UK, I remember is it Russia where the racism is really bad, or just Eastern Europe in general, where they would throw like bananas at the black players?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite bad. Like even in Spain, it's quite bad.
So I've been hearing about how bad the racism gets out there. It's just this idea of kneeling to me always felt like a personal thing and very passive. Like you're literally kneeling. And after you sat with the military.
The actual rebels were the few players who were like, well, no, I'm not going to kneel because it seems like a pointless gesture. Though actually the real rebel is, so there's this kneeling stuff. It's obviously like a cultural import from the USA. And like it came to the UK as being like against racism. And everyone in the UK has to at least pretend to be against racism. I mean, I think the same is also true in the US. So it wasn't ever that controversial kneeling. But what is incredibly controversial is players who don't participate in the minute silence on the November 11th or that week to commemorate World War I and World War II. And there's basically just one player who won't do that, who is an Irish player who won't wear a poppy and won't participate in anything like this. And he is like the right-wing media scream at him every year. Though I would note in the UK that doesn't affect like his playing prospects at all.
Oh, and he's protesting the war. Why? He just thinks it was an unjust war.
Well, yeah, he thinks it's basically a commemoration of like a British Imperial Army, which obviously then went on as soon as the World War I finished to fight in the Irish War of Independence, obviously against Irish independence, and then so on with the Troubles in Northern Ireland and so on and so on.
I would assume that would happen more for your boys up north. No, I would think there'd be more Irish players that are like that. No.
Well, there's just not that many Irish players in the UK, and specifically like, well, there are quite a lot of people from the Republic of Ireland, but people in the Republic of Ireland don't really give a shit about they care a lot less about because they're not kind of entangled in this stuff as much. While people from the north do care more, but then again, it's only half the population on the Republican side who care in the way that would make protesting the poppy irrelevant. And then you're talking about 300,000 people.
Yeah, that's the kneeling thing in general. I'm glad it's over to a certain extent, but what we saw from that is no one speaks up anymore.
James
like, when is anyone
is the Irish player who doesn't do it.
Oh, he's the Irish player?
Yeah.
And he's still playing? This wasn't like years ago. This guy's playing right now?
Yeah, he's still playing in the UK. Well, technically he's playing in he plays for a Welsh team, but a Welsh team that plays in the he plays for the Wrexham, which is owned by those two Hollywood guys.
Ryan Reynolds and the dude from Always Sunny.
He plays for that team now.
Well, that team is like actually won a chip, right?
They have won their promotions several times in a row, so now they'll be going into the second league next season.
Are they all sellouts?
Yeah, definitely. It's a thing of like, I mean, it's like, it's not that romantic of a story, right, with Wrexham, because they try to portray it very romantic in the TV show. But the reason they won the 5th division and the 4th division and the 3rd division is that in each case, they've had the largest budget of any team in those divisions. They won't in the 2nd division, because then you start getting into serious oligarchical financial power that two Hollywood guys can't compete with. So it will be interesting if they get a bit more romantic from then on. But so far, like, while portrayed as a romantic story, it's not really romantic. It's the biggest team with the most money winning the league each time.
But isn't it interesting though? Kind of that to me is this story in a nutshell about selling out. You can portray two extremely wealthy guys as just two men with a dream trying to help some working class footballers out live their dream. And we forget that this is just about how far money can take you until you meet real big money. And then it becomes a battle of really big money against, like you said, oligarchical, Saudi money.
Yeah, I mean, my team has won a cup for the first time in like 60 years this year. And I find myself not really giving a shit because we're owned by Saudi Arabia. So it's like, yeah, we should be. Who cares?
We can buy everything that we want.
Of course.
What happens, and this goes into selling out as well. I wrote recently an article for Damage Magazine about the NIL in college football, which is name, image, and likeness, because now college players get paid. And
that is the craziest part of American football. Like, you have so many players playing in the college system who, I don't know if you're saying it's changed now, but don't get paid.
Now they get paid, and it's crazy. Now there's player movement and pay, and I wrote this article saying that this one player that was going to the NFL, the reason why he didn't go high in the draft was because he represented this massive changing of the guard when it comes to advertising dollars and his ability to see himself not as a player first, but as a brand first, and not really care so much about the league. And the league is a small stepping stone into something that he sees as much bigger. Kind of like how we look at LeBron James, maybe. Like, Michael Jordan is a guy that really was good at basketball, got a Nike deal, and had no idea what he was getting with Nike. Had Converse offered him more money, he would have signed with Converse. He wanted to sign with Converse, right? Michael Jordan is like, that's what everybody wore. They didn't wear Nikes. That's for running. He signs with Nike, and the rest is history. And so everybody wants to be like Mike in the post Michael Jordan era, because we understand that if you sign these major deals, you can be this thing that becomes bigger than the game. But beyond Mike is like, well, I want to be a movie mogul. And you get LeBron James is like, look, Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan. I'm not going to have 6 championships, but I can play in Los Angeles, be closer to the industry, and make myself a movie mogul. You know, I can make my team draft my son, and we could be the first ever father and son combo on the court. Like I can do this shit. And Shedeur Sanders represents something even like the next evolution of that, which is, I'm going to play football for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to be the biggest brand known to man. And the NFL is like, we don't know how to deal with you, so we're going to show you that you can't fuck with us. Remember what we did to Kaepernick for taking a knee? You'll go in the 5th round. So the way we view sports, I think, is kind of skewed, because what you're talking about is like, I can't even get into my team winning this championship because they're owned by Saudi Arabia. NFL owners for years have had ties to exploitive industries, but we don't really have tech oligarchs owning teams outright, right? Not really. Maybe they've made some money in tech and sold off their thing, and they're just an owner. But they were like steel magnates and oil magnates and things like that. They definitely worked in extractive industries that hurt the environment, right? There's not a guy with a massive wind farm that owns the Cowboys. So we're kind of divorced from that aspect of the sport. And now with college football, you can't divorce yourself from that aspect of the sport anymore, because venture capital, dig this, Stefan, is literally trying to buy teams and divisions, whole divisions. And they don't want to buy your school.
Right. That's what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to say the financial capital is trying to buy universities just so they could like use the football team.
They want to sponsor, buy the football team and the basketball team. To hell with the other sports. Y'all figure it out. And right now, college is holding them off. But another thing people don't understand, I believe there's about 4 colleges that are actually profitable with sports. Sports is a loss leader for most universities, mainly because of Title IX that says women's sports have to get the same as men's sports. And people don't. The last 2 years have been the first year that the WNBA has made money. Constantly lost money. Caitlin Clark has been a game changer for the college game as well. This is the first couple of years of the women's college Final Four has had more viewership than the men's. Maybe they'll want to invest in that now that they see that there's money in it. We don't know. But what I'm saying is, we may be looking at a moment where there is this kind of venture capital so invested in our sports. And what is that going to make it look like already when you have an athletic elite to the point where the NBA is damn near made up of ex-players' kids? Football starting to get their juniors in as well. So we always prided ourselves on, you can make it with true grit and determination. If you work hard, you can excel through the ranks. Now, you come from a country or a part of the world where that's very different. You have to be chosen at a very young level to play at these elite clubs. I know a kid that left home at 13 from the States to go play in Spain. 13. It's a different world over there, right? The US is really trying to mimic that model. We literally have a prep school in Florida that was started by sports agents. And it's just a massive training facility.
In the UK, if you don't get a pro contract at 17, then that's basically it.
you're trash.
Yeah.
Right? You're seriously, let's be real. You're trash.
Yeah. Yeah. The funny thing with
I know we've gone off for an hour. Yeah.
Women's sports in the European system, the European has this financial system where to stop, well, it is not really to stop that, but for instance, teams can't lose more than a total of like 120 million over 3 years, and this is a stop. It's meant to stop teams going bankrupt, but what it also stops is it at least limits the amount of money that, say, Saudi Arabia can just pour into a team. But what they've done is losses on women's football, women's infrastructure doesn't count towards that. So you can build as much stuff as you want, as long as you say it's for the women's, then you're good. You can lose as much money as you want in women's football. And so actually, Saudi Arabia have taken Newcastle women's football team from some shithole team in like the 4th division to like a fully professional team, which again, like Wrexham, has the romantic story of charging up the divisions by just spending the most money.
And we miss that whole thing altogether. We don't even care to interrogate, this idea of venture capital money or Saudi money, and it's getting poured into American sports as well. Saudi money. They want to get their hands in the college athletics as well with this NIL stuff because it's just the Wild West. So again, I don't know how people are going to take this idea of selling out, because everyone has to look in the mirror at some point and ask themselves, am I doing this because I love it, or am I doing this because I understand search engine optimization? And I'm not trying to make I'm not trying to make the best show possible. Like I like
Jason,
music
some
that
people love search engine optimization. That's their passion.
We can talk off air. It's frightening what I've found out. Like I still appreciate people trying to make the best thing they can possibly make, right? I think every time we set out to do something, and I'll say this, and I'm trying to flatter you as much as possible, because I really do look at some of the stuff that you do, Stefan, kind of in awe. I'm like, this kid's really smart. He says, really dope things, and I love the way that he lays it out. When you do the PowerPoint presentations, I'm always like, oh, this is so cool. Like, Stefan is so cool. We're all trying to do the best we can with what we have, right? And sometimes when we get a little extra money, we invest it in ourselves. Like, I get that. But we're never chasing the algorithm. Like, I think when you're working through your thesis, so a lot of the shows you do are centered around your doctoral thesis. And maybe something you read in the news here and there, but you're never chasing a headline. And that's why these guys are getting burnt out, because as news is so fast in this era of Twitter. I don't even know what you're serious about, because you're just following headlines. I'll do 12 shows. I'll do 100 shows on homelessness if I have to, because this is something that I've experienced. It's people that I work with. It's people that I care about deeply. And it's something that I think as a society, we don't reckon with properly. I think there's a bipartisan concern for homelessness that pretty much everybody wants to find some sort of solution, but it's not the cause du jour. So people in our world just don't want to cover it. It's not a big story. We've done shows where we literally had people from the encampments that are about to get raided call in and do a show with us so they could try to raise money. Nobody watched.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think the thing that I like to do, at least sometimes, and I don't really get much opportunity to do it, is to sometimes like use these popular formats. For instance, tier lists. Me and Ben once did a tier list, but to doing that, but focusing firstly on stuff we want to do, but also doing it on our own way. Because the idea of doing a philosopher tier list is a ridiculous idea, because it would just be based on our opinions, and then the fact that me and Ben disagree. So what we did, I don't know if you ever clicked on that one.
I saw a little bit of it.
What we did was, we weren't rating the philosophers, but we were rating, if you heard some guy say, this philosopher is my main influence, would you think they were a poser, or would you think they were cool?
That's dope. That's dope. Me and Ben have been trying to bring back Poser, actually.
Cool. This is the part where I'd normally
bring
ask Ben what he's going to write next week, but presumably you're not going to write anything next week, and you won't be here next week.
I am going to write something. I am going to. Well, I won't be here, but I'm going to write something next week. Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to write something, dude. This is you're going to get a very heartfelt polemic about how I feel about what's going on, and also I'm going to write about what it's like to live amongst this, because I think what happens is if you don't live amongst this, you're going to have one of two opinions. Either there's going to be, well, these people just are mentally ill, or you're going to be in the just give them all a house camp and say some kind of overly simplistic lib bullshit. Yeah. But there's never any sympathy for the people that kind of live and work in amongst all this, and everything is demoralizing. Like I'm walking through. I'm going to have to walk to get my car through this sea of humanity that is hard to deal with for most people. Tourists, if they're here, Stefan, it's so funny. They don't look up. They just stay looking at a phone because it's giving them direction. Right. So they don't look up. And so I want to express my feelings on that. So that'll be coming out next week on the TIR Crisis Papers.
Cool. We'll see you all next week, friends. Bye.